Welcome to another edition of the Ratitude Podcast. I'm very, very excited to introduce our guest, Shannon Rae. And it's so interesting how we met. We met on an internet game show, and she lives in Las Vegas, where I was born. I went through there and we had coffee once, and have just continued to watch each other on our world travels. Shannon, I think, travels as much, if not more, than I do. In fact, in just kind of waiting for this to start, we were talking about where we're headed, and we're both headed in amazing places in the next few months throughout the end of the year. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But Shannon Rae is just, I wasn't even sure how to introduce her because she has so many expertises. But we're going to talk about nonviolent communication today because she's been practicing it for 30 years. She responded on one of my Facebook posts saying, I know this because I was looking for someone to talk about because it's something new for me and I'm really wanting to learn it. And Shannon, I couldn't think of a better person to join us on this podcast to talk about nonviolent communication. Welcome to the Ratitude Podcast, Shannon Rae.
Yeah, thank you. It's such an honor to sit with you. And I absolutely love how we met. I think we meet people like that because we're all over the world, right? And we're just open to connecting with everyone and love conscious conversations with people. And you're such a good example of that.
Well, you are too. And so I picked up this book, Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And I think I'd probably purchased it at least 2 times previous to now. But now is when it's really hit me. My daughter was telling me about it. She goes, Dad, you really need to read this and practice this. And I listened to my daughter. And so I got it and I started reading it because usually I read at least a book a week. I'm reading like 3 books at once right now, but I speed read them. And that's not a good way to read when you really want to read for content. So I slowed down, I got my highlighter out and I went slowly and I go, oh, isn't that fascinating? Oh, isn't that fascinating? I mean, it all makes sense, right? But, we don't always do things that make sense, do we?
I love that you found your way to it through your daughter. 30 years ago, I had been introduced to it through women's circles and various connections and communities. And I sort of did the same thing. I just kind of passed it over and didn't think too much of it. It was ironically brought to me in an article and a story about his work around the Palestinian-Israeli community and really finding a balance of how do we understand each other when it's very hard to understand each other, which I think is really a great simplistic understanding of why it's a powerful work. And then I deep dove really into it as a parent. And I actually he used to have these little pamphlets, like you get a book today, right? But 30 years ago, we had these like little pamphlets that you would like order on the internet. And I got it and it talked about how to have conversations with my children. And it profoundly changed my parenting. And as a coach, I thought, oh my gosh, I need to use this as a practitioner. And now it's a required work for everybody who works with me. And it's integrated in all of our programs. It is a foundational piece of communication work and relationship work and understanding your needs. It's one of the most powerful, most profound works that I've worked with in my 3 decades of work doing this work.
Yeah, I think one of the things that kind of turned me off at first was just the word violent, like nonviolent word, like who would have violent communication? So could you describe for our audience what that really means? Because it doesn't mean what I thought it meant.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it comes from its original roots. Like when you really think about why he wanted to bring peace to the planet and he wanted to go into war-torn areas and places that were not having conversations and really believe that if we understood each other's truest needs and really understood the heart of where we were coming from and what our needs were, that as a humanity, we would start to bring more peace to the planet. And I think that's where it arose. But it's the most simplistic, easy concept. It's 4 simple steps, 5 if you really understand it deeply, because the first is permission-based. But it's really understanding what are the facts, how do I feel, what do I need, and would you be willing to? And it's just 4 simple steps that anybody can use very quickly. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer if you want to dive deep into that communication. And I love it because it's robust enough to say, got it. It's sort of a state of the union a little bit, right? To really understand and to begin to dive into some details of where someone is at so that you can say, I'm here, you're here, how do we meet in the middle? And so I agree with you. I had the same response, by the way, like nonviolent. I kind of thought like, well, I'm not having violent communication. This isn't valuable to me, but it's actually not that at all. It's really about how do you listen to and understand the needs of your partner, your child, your team member, your colleague, your business partner, connect to their feelings and understand them, and then really meet each other where we're at. And I think it's got that's very simplistic because there's some very technical elements of those 4 steps that I think is what makes it really profoundly powerful and different than, hey, this is my feelings, these are my needs, let's get this done, right? There's some nuance to actually executing those technical steps very, very effectively that actually produces the most profound results, I think, which is why his research and his outcomes are extraordinary.
Yeah. When I was just kind of prepping for our podcast here, I was just looking through my my notes and my highlights. And one of the things I saw was he used the word alienating language. And that struck a chord to me. Go, oh yeah, I've seen that when it feels like it alienates me. It doesn't feel violent, but it feels like it alienates me. And then of course he contrasts that with what it really is compassionate communication. And I like that too. So I don't know why he called it nonviolent, but other than your
much better word for it.
The intent initially.
It absolutely was. It's really, I think compassion is the most extraordinary word for it. It is absolutely a nail in the, in the target, absolutely perfect for what you're looking to do. And it really asks yourself, first and foremost, to be compassionate with yourself and to really come responsibly to a conversation and say, what are your feelings? What are your needs? And do you have a very measurable request that you can speak to someone that they can actually succeed at and show up with you at? And can you use that in a consistent compounding effect in your relationship so that when you succeed at that one micro request, that all of a sudden I get excited about doing more requests and meeting more needs for you? Because isn't that how our brain works? You know a lot about brain science. I know with all of the work that you do, which is why I'm super excited to see you really diving into this, because with the work that you do, combine, they dovetail so well together when you start to understand that, wow, I've really set my partner or my child or my colleague up for success by telling them exactly how to show up and win with me, right? How to actually do that. And in order to be compassionate with another, right, we have to be compassionate first with ourselves. And so it also, I really believe, brings about self-responsibility in our relationships to kind of understand what those things are for ourselves. And then when we start to do that for ourselves, we get much better at doing it for others because we start to see, oh, this feels really good. This works. Why wouldn't I want to do it with someone else? And then it becomes a very efficient way of communication.
Well, it's interesting because I was communicating with a friend and I decided I was going to practice it. So I would write it down and then I go, I better check this with ChatGPT. And it's like the coolest thing. I typed it in there, said, hey, ChatGPT, would you NVC this? And it comes back and it was a real learning process on how I could actually get better. So that's a real value in ChatGPT because I didn't want it to write it for me. I just wanted it to teach me how I could do it. So I don't have to rely on a computer. I could do it myself, but it was really fascinating. So you've talked about 4 or 5 steps. So let's start with the first step. What is the first step?
Before we do that, can I go back to what you just said about ChatGPT? Because I think there's a very incredible, powerful nuance to what you just said. The number one thing that I do with clients when they start learning MVC is exactly what you just did. It's the practice of figuring out, how do I MVC this, right? How do I get the language right? There's a lot of nuances to it. Being able to do the work yourself and then take it into ChatGPT and help you really refine that. Those nuances in that language, using I statements, or did I state enough facts or feelings on the first step? So I just want to state before we start stepping into the steps that we live in the most amazing time frame to be able to do that, because I spend an inordinate amount of time with my clients doing that work. I'll have them MVC it, send it back to me. And then we do a lot of this back and forth around how to get the language and how to really frame it appropriately to be effective, right? And so the steps are simple, but getting that technique down is really take a lot of practice. So I just want to honor you, first of all, for making that a practice and actually putting that in. And I really believe in the power of AI to amplify what already exists in us and to really create those nuances. It's like having a coach in your corner to be able to do that. So please do more of that. And please, everyone listening, do more of that, because we will get there faster. We will get farther faster together by doing that work. So
now the first step, what's the first step?
The first step is debatable, actually. So the first step is technically, out of the 4-step process, identifying the facts of the situation. Some people would argue there's a step before that. So I call it the 0 step, which is to ask permission. So I want to start with that before I step into what people typically think are the step one.
I like that.
And it is a step that's really missed. It's actually trained in a practitioner's training with NVC. So it's very common in a lot of NVC communities. That it's really important for the setting, the timing to make sure that someone's really prepared to have this conversation with you. If you just kind of dive into it, like you might be ready, right? But I might not be ready. So if I were to come to you, Robert, and say, hey, do you have a moment and is this an appropriate time? I'd like to have a clearing conversation with you, which is often how we have it. Or you can also say, like to NVC something with you is another way to have that conversation. Another simple way, if they don't have the same language with you, is, hey, do you have a few minutes to sit down and talk through something? Something's been on my mind and I have a few requests and a few things I'd like to talk through with you. Is this a good time to do that? And so again, finding the right time where both people can be present and sit down is what I call the 0 step. The step before the step, and very, very important because you can have every one of the other 4 steps right and just it lands wrong because someone just wasn't in the right space to hear you. They just had something else going on. I saw a meme the other day that somebody said being married is about realizing that 9 out of 10 arguments are really because someone's stressed, someone is hungry, and someone's tired, right? And that's what the 0 step is designed to prevent.
I love that. Okay, so you need to talk to this dude and put that into his book. It says that 0 step is so, so important. I'm going to remember that one. And I love that one. So thank you for that. So now, are we ready for step one?
Yes, step one. Step one is really all about identifying facts. And it's this a simple way to understand it is facts over feelings. A lot of times when we're upset with our partner because they didn't do the dishes last night, and let's say it's as simple as we made an agreement that you do dishes on Monday and I do dishes on Tuesday, right? And it's Tuesday and all of a sudden the dishes didn't get done on Monday and now I'm doing your dishes, my dishes, and I'm frustrated with that. And so a lot of times we want to have a conversation around our feeling about it or our opinion about it, our judgment about it, right? We get into this whole story in our brains. And what we really want to do in the first step is keep it very simple and safe. So a fact would be, hey, Robert, we agreed that you would do dishes on Monday night and I would do dishes on Tuesday night and that you would have your dishes done before you went to bed at night. And I woke up this morning and there were a lot of dishes still in the sink. First of all, do I have our agreement right? Like, do I have the facts straight? But that's kind of checking in with each other about that's the facts of the situation, right? So if I want to talk about the dishes, I'm not going to talk about like, I can't believe it. We had a disagreement. You never do these things. And all this other stuff starts to come in the conversation, or we're having a conversation about the dishes and the clothes and all the different things. So it's really about facts over feelings, keep it simple, and then really just make sure that you agree on the facts. Yeah, you're right. We did. Absolutely.
Okay. So I like how you described that. One of the things that I learned in the book is as the recipient of that kind of feedback, that it would be really great if you could separate the fact from the evaluation part. And I'm not sure I was able to do that in the past, but that's like a huge thing to me if I could just look for. So it's not just the way you're speaking, it's the way you're receiving too. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult because, we live in a world where there's a lot of judgment and a lot of attack and a lot of blame. And it's really subtle, subversive language that we use, right? So the reason that's important from the receptivity standpoint is that we tend to brace for impact, right? We're tending to brace for like, what are you going to do? And all of a sudden I get defensive and all of a sudden I want to kind of step in and have this conversation and do these pieces. And this step is not about evaluation on either side. It's yep, that's the facts. We made that agreement, right? It's a lot easier when the speaker actually doesn't go into, evaluation as well. But it's very important, which is why the 0 step, I'm going to go back to that. It's why the 0 step is so important because the 0 step sets it up for the receiver and the speaker to put themselves in the frame of mind to come at it with an open heart and an open mind. And it sort of already says, we're going to collaborate on this. And if I say I want to have a clearing conversation or I want to use MBC, it's really great in teams, in families, in relationships to both understand that dynamic. Because then when I have that conversation, both people can prepare themselves to come and say, I'm ready. I know already by the pure fact that we're going to use this technique that I'm not going to be attacked. And that allows you to be receptive to hear someone else's perspective. And I already know, even if they're not perfect at it, right? Even if we're not practiced and we miss steps, that the intention is to use a practice by which we actually focus on your needs and my needs. And I can come with that kind of practice. So yeah, 100%. It's much easier to use when two parties are at least semi-familiar with it. It doesn't mean you have to read the whole book, by the way. There's little pamphlets where you can read a few pages, and there's a ton of knowledge of this on the internet where people can kind of get started. But absolutely. And again, you do that without the 0 step, much harder for someone to be ready and in that state of mind.
I love the word you use, collaborative. To me, that's a key thing, along with that 0 step that could just change the dynamics of the conversation so much. It's unbelievable.
That's why we say, are you willing or ready to have a clearing conversation? Because even just the word and phrase, are you willing to have a clearing conversation, sort of initially says there's something that we need to clear. That doesn't say you did something wrong. That doesn't say I did something wrong. It doesn't mean that I did something to you or you did something to me. But let's clear this, because there's a story going on that I'm telling myself, which is not NVC work, a little bit of Brene Brown work right in there. Like the story I'm telling myself is when you start to integrate and layer these concepts, right, you start to be able to be in that receivership space, in this space where I can not sit here and start in that analyzing or prepping my lodge back at you, you know what I mean? And we're back and forth in this piece because I feel a need to defend myself. That safe space is crucial. And even calling it a clearing conversation preps that.
I love that too. So I got a 0 step, I got collaborative, I got clearing. You're just a wealth of information, and we're just on step 1. Are we ready to go to step 2?
Absolutely.
Okay, so step 2.
I think this is another challenging step for people for 2 reasons. This is about I feel, and then you complete that sentence essentially, or I felt. So essentially when I walk home, let's say, or I get up on Tuesday morning and I notice that the dishes weren't done according to our agreement, how did I feel? The first thing we often do is we don't use feeling words. We feel like I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy. We don't have a robust language of our feelings in this society. So there's a feeling word checklist that again, any of you can Google, and there's hundreds of them out there used in this work specifically. And you can actually pull it out and say, how do I feel? And it's a very robust language so that you can get more nuanced and more specific and more really articulate about how you feel for yourself, but also for whoever you're communicating. The second concept is we use these things called near feelings. And near feelings are often judgments. I feel disrespected, all of those types of things are near feelings that are not quite feelings. There are opinions, there are judgments, there are stories. And so you sort of want to, in that second step, be really clear about your feelings, articulate them in actual feeling words, and stay away from near feelings. And so it's often just one simple sentence. I think if you're going on and on and on about all of these things, you're likely missing the simplicity of the step. And it's really to say, I felt really stressed, disappointed. I felt anxious when I saw all those dishes in the sink in the morning. I also felt sad that we had made an agreement and I didn't feel like it got honored. And I thought maybe I wasn't being honored. That was the story I was telling myself. So that's a way that you can very simply say, this is how I felt. In fact, those 4 steps should really be 4 simple sentences, not long descriptions or definitions, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. In the book, it has lists of those feeling words, and it reminded me, and then I went back to look at it. Brene Brown has a feelings book called Atlas something. It's a big red book.
Yes, Atlas of the Heart.
Atlas of the Heart, yeah, where it was her research into all the feeling words. And I think she came up with, there's 86 of them that are more important than all of them. But that people use like 5 or 6. And we don't have a very good vocabulary for feeling words. And then a lot of people like me say, I don't feel anything. Well, we do feel a lot. We just don't know how to describe feelings very well. Or we use what you called non or near feeling words, which the book also describes. And I know on the internet, there's all those things. I have been really studying those because I'm trying to get in touch with my feelings and see what they really are. But again, it's just a simple little thing. Like you said, it should be just like one sentence, yet we don't don't have the skills to do that. Just think if we had the skills to do this. That's what I'm trying to do. And that's why I appreciate you being here.
Well, I spend months, Robert, with clients when I start this process with them, really diving into every single step before they ever use it. In fact, the most profound and powerful use of NDC in these 4 steps is not in communication with others. It's as a self-inquiry process within ourselves. And so I actually request that all of my clients use it as a self-inquiry process, because otherwise we're having conversations that aren't really what we're trying to have. And that's why we have misses in communication, is because I think I'm being clear, but the truth is I'm not even really clear with myself. And then I'm frustrated with you because you didn't understand what I didn't really communicate, because I didn't really understand for myself. And now all of a sudden my needs aren't getting met, but I didn't really understand what they were. While facts versus feelings, step 1 is really challenging for us to kind of sink into. It gets a lot easier when we're actually really precisely clear about how we feel. And as you said, a lot of us numb out. We don't have feelings, and we've been doing it for so long. We're like, I don't know. We literally may not feel that feeling. And it takes a minute for us to do some embodiment work, some somatic, some real deep inquiry with ourselves to say, how do I feel? And again, distinguishing between near feelings and feelings. So it's really profoundly powerful to do this work, whether you have someone to communicate with or not, because your relationship with yourself is the most important. And what you'll find is that all of a sudden, this becomes natural, the way you communicate. It's not like I'm going to sit down and do a technique. It's that this is the way I communicate with everyone, because you learn to communicate with yourself this way. And so we'll spend entire months on just the feeling word checklist and saying, what is it that you feel? And when was the first time you felt that? And where is that really coming from? And what is the story around that feeling? What's the difference between near feelings, and why do those near feelings come up? Because it's a judgment and a story, and unwinding that story so that we can get to the raw, truly authentic feeling that's coming up. And the more beautiful thing is, 9 times out of 10, if you get really good at doing this as a self-inquiry process, your needs in communication with others start to actually really wane, because you're handling them yourselves. That's not to say that we're independent and we don't need people. I'm a true tribalist, by the way. But it's powerful and profound when you can do that with yourself. And this step is the first step that I really start digging deep with clients on, so that they can do that self-inquiry process and get precisely clear. Now, that's not to say don't have the communication and spend months not communicating or using the tool, right? I want you to do both. I want you to start practicing it and communicating feelings to people and fumble your way through it. And it doesn't need to be perfect or fancy or all of those things. And also be doing the work internally to refine that and to kind of get clearer on that and have that conversation with yourself on a regular basis. One of the, I think, most profound pieces of wisdom from this author actually came from his really great work of teaching us that anger is an indicator that you have an unmet need, which leads into the 3rd step. And that is really about understanding our feelings and digging into them and really understanding where they're coming from with us. So,
yeah, that was one of my observations after reading the book, because I was reading it to see how to communicate outwardly. And then I was reminded that, we're all just mirrors to each other. And I go,
Amen.
If we're a mirror to each other, then I need to think about how am I communicating to myself? And that's been interesting, just to become conscious of that, going like, well, I'm not alienating to myself. I'm not violent to myself. But when you start really listening, you learn some interesting things. So I love the fact that that's what you have your clients do to start out with. And that's one of the things I've been trying to do myself.
That's the practice of grace, by the way. To me, that's the practice of grace. This is the heart of the practice of grace. We talk a lot about grace, God's grace, giving grace to others, right? Whatever form of grace you want to think about. But this is the most core, raw, authentic form of grace that we can give to ourselves. And it's the most embodied practice in my experience to use these 4 steps as that inquiry process and to start to give ourselves grace and to allow ourselves, first of all, just to feel those feelings. How many times, Robert, do we just not give ourselves the freedom or the permission to feel what we feel? I've got to get through this. I've got to move on. I've got to, right? From grief to loss to anger to frustration. We don't just really say it's okay to feel what we feel, and to dive in and just sit with it and be with it. And just that practice alone can profoundly transform somebody's life.
It's interesting you say that, because I think that I've been guilty of that, of just trying to be so positive in life that whatever happens, I just shift it to positive and I don't feel that feeling. But in the last 3 weeks or so, I had this experience. I've had all sorts of experiences in the last month or so, but I was at a place here in Naples called the Unity Church. But it's just a beautiful place with indigenous lands. And we did this exercise where we had 3 stones and we blew our 3 biggest wounds into those stones, and then we bury them in this place. And my friend Pete had recommended this book to read. It's called The Overstory. And it's about trees, and the trees can communicate with each other and communicate. And I was just sitting there. I buried my stones, and I'm just in the middle of this kind of forest. There's ferns and 100-foot trees. And all of a sudden, the wind starts blowing through, and I'm listening, and I got messages from the trees. I mean, it's like the trees spoke to me. And I went back Saturday night. Saturday night was the new moon. So I went there on another process, and I said, okay, trees, you got any message for me? And it had rained earlier, and the rain was on the tips of the pine needles, and they were slowly dropping down. And what popped into my head, the message from the tree was, it's okay to be sad. It was okay to slow down, and it was okay to cry. Those 3 messages came from the tree. And I'm sitting there going like, wow, I'm trying to be happy all the time. I'm putting in these seraphim blueprint energies into me to be high all the time. And the trees are telling me, no, you don't need to do that. If you're sad, be sad.
There's so much power in the entire spectrum of feelings and emotions. It is one of the biggest corners to turn, I think, in transformation, in really deep authenticity with yourself, because I like to transform and really reframe. Feelings and communications are sort of like our messages from the other side, or messages from within us, however you really want to look at it. But it's just a dashboard. It's a dashboard in your life. And you wouldn't ignore some signals and pay attention more to others if you were driving your car, or if you were, a pilot flying a plane, right? All of those indicators are important. They have messages that are important to us, and we need to get those messages. Sort of like anger is a message that we have an unmet need. That's great. Okay. Let me dive into this anger now and find the value in it. When you shift your perspective that every feeling and emotion has value, nothing is good or bad or right or wrong. It just is. And it's here to communicate, just like those pine needles were with you, right? All of a sudden, you feel better about, first of all, you feel better about diving into it. You're looking for the value, not the positive, good, excellent, everything all the time, right? But you're saying, what's the message? What's the value? How does this move me forward? Or what do I need to hear about this? Or what does someone else need to hear about this from me, right? Which again allows us to be more precise in our communication to others. Because if I don't even know what it's communicating to me, how can I tell you what it's communicating in our relationship, right? How do I even know what I need? And how can I ask you for anything specific, or, develop an agreement with you around how we show up with each other if I don't even know what the heck is happening to me, right? So again, that's why I think it's so powerful, and it brings in such a sense of self-responsibility, which when we step into ownership, we step into power. It's one of my most important beliefs. Without ownership, we don't have our power, right? Without power, we don't have ownership. They are blended, they're intermixed in that way. And feelings are sort of a pathway to that. They give us the insight and information. And when we take ownership of that, we can dive in and mine it for all the gold it's worth. And so I just like to tell people, just imagine you're sitting in your own private jet, with all the dashboard in front of you, and all of those lights that are happening in your life are just feelings and emotions. They're just what it wants to have a conversation with you. And we unfortunately don't teach our youth in school, how to speak an emotional language. And yet 90% of our communication is nonverbal, right? And so it's all coming from that feeling world. And when we, again, love the whole dashboard and the entire spectrum, we can now start to find value in it. And it moves faster. We're more efficient with our relationships, and we have more energy to play and to laugh and to have fun and to love and to build and to grow and to do all the things that we love to do as humans.
Okay, are we ready for step 3?
Yes, the step 3 is actually my favorite step, and that is identifying your needs. There's also a universal needs list, which you can also Google, very easy for people to find. Also a step that I spend an extraordinary amount of time with clients on, because it's basically saying, these are my needs. So we made an agreement that you would do dishes on Monday and I would do them on Tuesday. The fact was I woke up on Monday or on Tuesday and the dishes weren't done as we agreed to. I felt X, Y, and Z. I need, and now I'm going to communicate my needs. Again, very simple and basic. I need reliability and trust and the ability to count on my partner when we make an agreement that you'll be able to do that. I also need communication, that if something comes up for you on Monday and you can't do that, I need you to communicate that with me so that I can show up and support you too. And I need consistency, so that I can show up and that helps me. We made that agreement because I need consistency in my day and I like to wake up. I also need harmony in my physical environment. And when I wake up and everything's disheveled and all out of the place and not consistent, I have a hard time showing up for my day too. So that would be an example of saying the needs that I have.
In that case, it wouldn't be, I need you to do the dishes.
Not necessarily. I'm not saying that it can't be that, but it's a much deeper than that. Is to say, what is my need for? I have a need for consistency. I have a need for reliability. I have a need for trust. I have a need for communication. I have a need for harmony in my physical environment. And so that's why that needs list is so important for you to look at, because a lot of us, just like the feelings, word checklist, we don't have a robust vocabulary around our needs. And we suppress our needs. We don't articulate our needs. We get codependent with other people's needs. We have all kinds of dysfunction in our society around our needs. And it's unfortunate because they're pretty basic. We're human beings and we have needs. I have needs, you have needs, and my needs matter as much as your needs matter. That's the other component of this, is essentially saying that I have needs, my needs are valid, and they matter equally to yours. And so it's important, I think I want to say at this point, when you have this conversation, a lot of people, when you start this conversation, if you don't prepare and you don't have a partner who really knows how to do this process with you, right? It becomes a little more difficult because the pattern is I want to defend, I want to articulate, I want to say, well, I have needs too, and I have this, and my needs are important. And all of a sudden we're in a battle over whose needs are more important, right? And it's really important to understand in this process that there will be a time we can actually do this process. We can clear your stuff too as soon as we clear mine, right? It doesn't mean that my stuff is more important than yours or that your needs don't matter too. You're going to have an opportunity to articulate your feelings and your needs. But a clearing conversation is essentially to go through the 4 steps fairly. We're not going through them fairly. I mean, we're stopping at each step. But when you have the conversation, it's a 2-minute conversation. Here's the facts. Here's my feelings. Here's my needs. Would you be willing to? And it kind of goes like that. And it's really important for the receiver to stay present with the feelings and needs of the speaker being communicated, and not to kind of find this as an opportunity to say, well, my needs are important too, right? It's really important to say, yes, of course. Every person on the planet has needs. They're valid, they're valuable, and they matter as equally as mine do. And so it's important to kind of, I think, honor and speak to that component at this step, because this tends to be a place where someone starts to be like, well, I have feelings and needs too. And it's really important to remember, yes, and they both matter. And I think that's indicative of the place that we don't honor our needs. We don't speak our needs. We don't listen to each other's needs. Very frequently in the world, we instead spend a lot of time trying to advocate for ourselves and validate ourselves, because when we're really not so much, or we don't feel it much in the world around us. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of safe spaces for that. Then we end up getting twisted, right? I'm going to blame you. I'm going to hold you responsible. I'm going to have expectations. All these funky things come in because we're trying to essentially just communicate that I have needs and I'd like to have a safe place to discuss them, and for someone to validate them and to show up for them.
I don't remember in the book having a needs list, so I'm going to Google that or look back through the book to see if there's that, because I know that they had the feelings list, but I don't remember the needs list. So that's an area I know I'm going to work on.
Yeah, no, I'm happy that, you know what, actually, Robert, I have a little simple pamphlet that breaks these 4 steps down. If somebody doesn't have a book or they haven't, they get overwhelmed by that big book. I have a lot of people like, that's a lot to get started with, right? It's just the 5, the 0 step and these steps. It outlines the near feelings, my feelings. It has a feelings word checklist and a needs checklist. I'm happy to send it to you. We give it free to everybody that we have for this exact reason, because you want to give it to your partner and you got to get started somewhere. So how do you give them the basics to kind of do that? And again, I give it to people because sometimes I'm not working on NVC. I just want them to understand what their needs are in the world, right? So sometimes we just start with those 2 steps, the feelings and the needs, and just say, let's actually identify what you're asking for, what you even want.
Okay. And then our final step?
Yep. And the final step is, would you be willing to? The key to this step is, this is where the request comes in. The key to this step that I think most people miss is, first of all, actually using those exact words. Would you be willing to? Which is, again, right in harmony with step 0. It's permission-based relationships, right? Would you be willing to? Which means that you have the choice. You have the choice in everything you do. This is not a requirement. This is not an expectation. This is not an ultimatum. This is not, putting down a boundary. This part of the conversation is saying, would you be willing to? The second part of the conversation is probably the most missed part of the conversation, or really hard for people to do. And that is to be really specific. So just like we think of SMART goals, right? SMART, measurable, or specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. I want you to do the same thing with this step. And an example of that is, I'm a girl, I'm dating a boy. I don't feel like I'm getting my love language is quality time. I don't feel like I'm getting a lot of time. We're spending a lot of time together. And I say to the boy, would you be willing to spend a lot more time with me? I just don't feel like we're spending enough quality time together. Can we have more quality time this week? That seems like a reasonable request, right? But how do I know, and does he know, when we've achieved that? So it's sort of my Lipson's test, right? Which is to really just say, how does he or she or whoever you're communicating with know whether or not they can succeed? You want to make a request so specific that they know if they do exactly that, they're going to win. And they're going to feel good, and you're going to feel good, and you're going to get your needs met. So a more specific request or an example might be, hey, Robert, quality time is my love language. Would you be willing twice a week to spend quality time with me? One of those I'd like us to do, actually go out and do something outside and spend at least 2 to 4 hours together. And one of them I'd like to be more inside, where we're just kind of like cuddling on the couch or eating dinner together or cooking, again, 2 to 4 hours together. Would you be willing to commit to putting that on our calendar every single week so that, and putting our phones down so that we're 100% present with each other? There's nobody else. We don't double date. We don't bring our kids along. It's just the two of us. Would you be willing to put those 2 dates in that format on the calendar with me starting next week? Now, much more specific.
I don't remember hearing that either. The would you be willing? I love that. I'm going to make sure that that's there. And I'll probably read the book again to make sure that I miss anything. You had some great nuggets here. Now, one of the things is, as you were saying it, you said it so beautifully. And I'm sitting there going, I wish I could have someone like that in my head right away so that it came out so smoothly that way. But what reminded me, though, or what I thought of was, in communication, we know that 7% are the words, and that 55% is either tone of voice or body language, and the other one is the other one. So 93% is body language and tone of voice. So how does NVC account for that? Because 93% of the communication is nonverbal.
I believe that's about using the self-inquiry process beforehand. So for example, if I do these steps as a self-inquiry process, and when I do it with my clients as a self-inquiry process, that then next step, so essentially the 5th step, is really asking yourself, what of these things am I not meeting for myself? How am I not meeting these needs right now for myself? How am I not showing up for my partner in a reflection that I can even receive these things that I'm asking for, right? Am I available for these things? Am I showing up for myself and doing that? If I'm asking for compassion or grace from someone else, am I giving compassion and grace to myself, right? If I'm asking for quality time, am I slowing down and giving myself quality time? Am I prioritizing that? When you do that process from step 0 to step 5, the 2 little ones that I kind of like bookend onto those 4 steps, what happens is now I'm starting to get in touch with my feelings. I'm starting to get in touch with my needs. And the truth of the matter is that I tell my clients, if you can't show up for yourself, meeting these needs and honoring these feelings, you don't have the right to ask your partner yet either. And what happens is you show up and you're violating them over and over again. I always say the person who truly violated your boundaries first was you. And when we start to take ownership of that, and that's not to victim shame, that's not to blame the person or to say it's your fault either. This isn't about fault, it's about focus. It's not about blame, it's about ownership and power. We want to actually slow down and say, can I provide this to myself? And yes, we need to also, that doesn't mean either, let's not be extreme. We have this tendency in our headline clip, social media, 60-second world that we live in to kind of like take a clip and then run with it. I'm not saying that you need to do this first and you can't be in a relationship until you do that. What I'm saying is that I'm inviting people to take some ownership and responsibility of showing up for themselves and making that a priority. That doesn't mean don't get into a relationship and practice it at the same time. It means that what you will receive from your partner will increase in proportion to what you provide to yourself. And that is vibrational. That is energetic, right? That is emotional. That is me. When I start to do that with myself, then all of a sudden, what happens to my tone, to my body language, it all shifts, right? Because my energy has shifted. And that has shifted because my relationship with myself has shifted. So when you use NVC as the original use, right? The purest, most original use of this process, and that is as a self-inquiry process. And you make those adjustments, when you come to that conversation, you're more at peace. You really understand that you're not asking someone to meet something that you haven't already met yourself. You're asking this partner really is more of a little bit of a self-inquiry process. Can this person actually show up? Are they willing to show up? Do they understand me? Do they understand themselves? Are they actually yoke to yoke for me? Can we harmonize? And if they can't, how do I adjust accordingly? And so that actually that process starts to change your tone, your delivery, all of those things, all that nonverbal communication, because you're at peace with yourself. You're not coming angry, attackful and all of those things. You don't have expectations of others because you've done the work before you get there to be able to deliver that from a place of peace, from a place of safety, from a place of clarity, from a place of partnership and collaboration, from a place of permission. Like, I'd love you to be here, but if you don't, that's okay too. The only way I get to that tone is that I get to an authentic, aligned place within myself.
That was just beautiful. Everything you've said is just so beautiful. I've been taking notes. I'm going to review this again. I can't wait for it to be published. And that's not published, whatever it is that.
Yeah, released into the world.
Yeah, so that I can see it again. I'm so excited about everything you said. Now, this is just a small snippet of what you do. For our audience, tell us what else it is that you do. If there's something that you've got coming up that you want people to come to, or tell us about you in case someone wants to reach you, how they reach you, and what they might reach you for besides non-violent or alienating communication.
I love when you opened this process, you said it's really hard to describe who I am. We live in a world today where people have this kind of mono focus, right? Like I work on relationships, or I do NVC, or I do sound bath, or I do coaching, or I do therapy. And one of the things that I've always been a firm believer in is that life doesn't actually happen in silos. Wouldn't it be great if they did and we could just kind of focus in on that, right? But the truth of the matter is it's so nuanced and it's so layered and it's so complex. So you're right. I do a lot of things. I do executive coaching and relationship coaching, and I work with businesses and do complete overhauls and scale companies. I do medicine work, by the way, and shamanic work. I'm in the middle of another initiation. I've been trained all over the world in jungles and clinical practices with 2 behavioral science degrees. But the heart of our work, I think, is around what we call power-centered living, loving, and leadership, which is really to understand the dynamics between what we have power in and what we try to have control over. And so we have all kinds of programs and products and things of that nature. People can find me at thepowerintegrationcenter.com. We have a thriving community of people who do this work and love to be in this world and really want to step into their power and use all of these tools in all parts of their life, whether it's in relationships or parenting or run your business, because we're sort of complex, multifaceted people, and we love to embrace all of those things.
Shannon, you are amazing. This was an amazing podcast. Great information. I'm sure that our audience will really value and treasure this one. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you the best with everything. If anyone in our audience wants to reach out to Shannon, she's kind of easy to find. And I highly recommend, if you want coaching, business coaching, personal coaching, plant medicine coaching, whatever kind of coaching, just reach out to Shannon because she's just an amazing soul. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. You're such an honor.